October 16th Assembly Work Session on the 2016 budget. And first, we'd like to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves. We'll start with you.
Patrick Flynn.
Jennifer Johnston.
Bill Evans. Dick Craddock.
Elby Bridget.
Steele. Pete Peterson.
Marilyn Bonza, OMB.
Lance Willer, OMB.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk. Rose Foley, Assembly Budget Analyst.
And we have Mr. Bosky on the phone, correct?
Amy DeBosky's on the phone.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, it's really hard to hear. I'm not sure if all the speakers are on.
Okay.
Barbara's come over to work on it, Amy.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Well, it is, but it sounds like your face is right next to the speaker.
Okay, with that.
What do you have, a camera
For the rest
there?
of the meeting, we will have Patrick Flynn translate.
While Ms. Jones is working on the sound, we're going to start this work session. Mr. Wilbur, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Well, I appreciate the Assembly joining us for our second work session today. We began last week with general government, and our goal today, starting 11 and running until 3 o'clock, we will complete the review of the general government budgets around 1 o'clock, and then hopefully we can take a little break, and then we'll move into the utilities, starting with ALU, and then concluding with ACDA, and we'll be done. I did pass out a schedule in the order in which the departments will be presenting today, and they're reflective of the slides, so if you'd like a copy of that, we can do that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and begin. The first department that we'd like to look at is the Assembly. For the Assembly...
Mr. Wilbur?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just going to pause for one quick minute. I'd like to recognize that Mr. Paul just joined the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So for the Assemblies, they had submitted in their submission of the budget and in reviewing their recommendations, this is what is in the proposed budget book. However, I recognize that the Assembly had recommended some changes that the administration would be proposing to support. So the second slide is a slide that we will be using when we create the S version. And so this is pretty much a reflection of the submission they gave to OMB. We neglected to accommodate this or review it and put it into our budget. So if I could just highlight some of these things, and I think the most important one is while the top of the screen, the one-time requirements are similar to the previous page, it's the proposed budget changes at the bottom that are new. The first one is the one-time requirement. This is for ZIG. In 2015, there was a one-time appropriation for $200,000 to support project manager for SAP to support the Assembly. There is still balance in that $200,000 of a little over $80,000, so we'll move that $80,000 in 2016 and continue the Assembly support for project manager and oversight of SAP. That's why the $81,000. So that's really going to come from the $200,000 you previously appropriated. The other changes are recommended proposed changes from the department as it relates to some adjustments they want to make inside there, and the OMB has no objections to those. I'll let the Assembly members speak to those. And then the last thing I want to point out is the Assembly office did submit a capital request for $490,000 for voting machines. That has not been included in your proposed budget as submitted to the Assembly, and we're working with our folks to try to figure out what would be the best way to fund that if we do it. I'm not sure that bonding voting machines would be an eligible expense. However, it is maybe something that we could work into the IT department and then how we fund that. So we'll need to provide some more information on what our options might be for the voting machine. So as it relates to the operating budget, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and then ask questions of the Assembly members.
Ms. Johnson.
I have a couple questions. One, the $10,000 for the training as far as Time Matters, does that mean that now our Assembly Council is using Time Matters? There was $10,000 for training. Do we know if you can't answer, could maybe our attorney mention if she's using Time Matters now?
I can't answer that. I do know that the and I think Rose can probably speak to this as well, that item was a carry forward into 2015, and I believe that some of that 10,000 was used in 2015.
Okay. Well then, yeah, just as a general question to the council, whether now trained and converted, is it fully implemented? The other question I have, so shoot, just had a senior moment. The removal of the 400,000 that is our overall, and it was my understanding that we're gonna go forward, and so is that in our current budget?
It is not, Ms. Johnston, what that is that was a one-time expense that was budgeted in 2015, and it's then a transfer to others. So in 2015, the 400,000, which is for the Assembly Meeting Manager System, was transferred to IT. So we're in the process of doing the RFP to go out to bid, and then that'll come out of the IT budget in 2015 or 16, whenever that's awarded.
So, well, it's just a matter of rebudgeting to IT versus being out of the assembly budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
Through the chair, that's correct. It was
Okay.
capitalized to
Okay.
IT, and they will pay those.
And then just a question as far as the voting machines and that is, I mean, it's an interesting question, and since we have antiquated state voting machines, and where are we going with this? And as we explore it and explore, whether does the municipality then become the voting, do we then have the voting machines for Anchorage versus the state? And all of those questions, I guess, would need to be answered if we even looked at bonding or how we looked at financing this.
Ms. Johnston, through the chair, that was probably a misnomer, a misunderstanding between the clerk's office and the administration. It's not specifically voting machines, it's a voting system. It's the hardware and software that is over in Suite 105. We have a server, an independent server over there. We have, and that is for that equipment as well as other equipment.
And that how long have we had that?
The GEM system, I'm sorry, through the chair, I don't know the answer to that. I expect that Ms. Moser might know the answer to that.
And
At least 2008.
and so the average life of that kind of system is, I mean, so is the reason we're replacing it is because it's gone beyond its normal lifespan.
Through the chair, it is definitely dated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Clarence?
I think my question was answered.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. Any other questions? Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see we have various reductions for 183,000 and some change. Anything from that we need to know about, or?
Well, through the chair, Mr. Peterson, thanks to Rose Foley, our new budget analyst, we scrubbed our budget. We did a lot of looking, we did a lot of analyzing, and we made some decisions that we needed to reduce, particularly some areas. We had a large amount in elections for miscellaneous, about 54,000. We just took it out. We also reduced the professional services in the clerk's office by about 100,000. And we felt that we needed to do this because, in particular, we have some staffing issues in the clerk's office, which I think you are all aware of. And those were more important to us than some of these other areas where we don't believe that we need the money in 2016.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee.
Rose and Barbara, thank you both so much for working on this. And Rose, it's great to have your office lunch. You not being there in that position really hurt this summer, so it's good to have that position to fill. Thanks for the great job you're doing. To see your work in scrubbing the extra funds we had in there and making sure they're not carried forward. And thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ditto. Okay, Mr. Goldberg, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could ask Dan Basler from Equal Rights to come up. I think their budget is relatively simple. They have some, basically moving forward with some adjustments in their salaries and benefits for their direct cost. The staffing account is pretty much going to be the same. I think similar to the Assembly, Ms. Basler proposed some changes to meet the goal at that 0.5% and that 2%. And in her case, the administration didn't think that those were acceptable here. So if you have questions about Pam's program, please, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. I don't see, Ms. Johnson, is your hand? Okay, I don't see any questions, so with that said, thank you. Please continue. You're welcome.
So next we have internal audit. I think very simple, similar to, hopefully Mr. Chadwick is jumping in right behind me. Similar to, I think the Equal Rights Commission, they too scrubbed their budget to meet the administration's initial intent. I think the one significant change here is we had, as Pete retired last year, we had a significant cash out, so that was a one-time expense that we aren't budgeting for 2016, so I think his program for 2016, it looks pretty much the same. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't see any questions, so let's continue. Thank you.
I like the theme right now. The mayor's budget, Madam Chair, I think the chief of staff was off today, so if you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and address the mayor's budget, if that's
Please
okay.
do.
Thank you. So, for the mayor's budget, we had some one-time expenses in 2015 in transition. We had a lot of sort of senior executives that were here for a few years, so we had some cash outs that we will not be requiring in 2016. And then there was an addition of a community grant. I believe it was awarded in first quarter. We took that piece out. The salary and adjustments are pretty significant. It's a downward cost of a reduction of $221,000, and really that's a reflection of a position, basically position changes, primarily in Susan Duck, and we also had a lot of people that moved. What was the other one? Salaries, just general salaries. The people that are in the mayor's office are being paid less than the previous administration. There's some other savings that they moved into, and I think in the proposed, again, similar to the two previous budgets, the mayor's office worked to meet that 2% reduction inside their budget, and so they had some travel reductions in travel and non-labor. So, if you have any questions from the mayor, I'll do my best to answer them, and if I can't, I will certainly get back with you to address them.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah. We had a lot of executives who had non-cashable leave as part of their compensation package from last administration, and I presume they use that to take their vacations. So it would be helpful to see sort of a summary of who, if any, members of the executive team and the mayor's office have non-cashable leave as part of their compensation package.
Okay.
And I can answer that. Now, you'll be seeing the third quarter exec compensation report. Almost all of the new appointments that have been made since July 1 will be on that. I believe that will be on either the next agenda or the one following that. So that'll all be on there with all the NCL reported in there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Abbott. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I don't see any other questions, so please continue, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the next department is the Office of Management and Budget.
Lots of questions on this one.
So, similarly, we had some one-time expense for a review of our cost allocation plan. Those was, I think it was a review of 2015 and 16. We are moving forward with that review. Again, we had some adjustments in salaries and benefits. The adjustment for the 146 is an adjustment between the vacancy factor and some SAP, and then the director's position for a total adjustment there at 146. We also had some changes for non-labor savings at 21,000. And then again, we have an SAP position inside our budget that will be capitalized similar to that you've seen for others. So if you have any questions on this one, I'll be glad to address those as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. First, Mr. Trainee, and then Mr. Flynn.
Last time we heard you, do we give you non-cashable leave too? That way he gets the answer now.
Yes, I have 80 hours of non-cashable leave.
There you go, Patrick.
One.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So that's basically, we added you
Yes.
and just to sort of follow up on the question from last week, we're going to need some more clarity around the SAP capitalization before we make a final decision.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Johnston?
I was interested as far as you brought up vacancy factor, and it would be interesting at some point to either have a short work session as far as how budget management is dealing with the vacancy factor now
Okay.
and how this affects them.
In the department or overall?
Overall.
Okay.
Anything else, Ms. Johnson? Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Trainee?
Remember when they send non-cashable leave formula for the executives on the executive branch, would you do the same thing for the assembly legislative branch? Any non-cashable leave we get our employees, so Patrick knows what we're doing too. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee, so we all know. Okay, no other questions? Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Hoping Mr. Falsey is walking up. All right, I'm going to speak for the attorney. So,
Mr. Wilbur?
Yes, ma'am.
We're like about 5 minutes ahead. If you want to wait
Go
for
ahead
him
and
to
come
do his presentation, you know, I mean, he knows that he's supposed to be here at 11:25.
Yes.
It's totally up to you, but, you know, if you're...
Jump ahead.
I think we have some folks here from Economic and Community Development. We could just keep proceeding, and then if we get ahead and Mr. Falsey shows up, we can go back.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So if we could go ahead and come up with Economic and Community Development, so go back to the slide again. So Economic and Community Development, really what we're showing here is transfers from other departments. We talked a lot about this last week, and basically the creation of the Economic and Community Development Department. We're moving existing positions and funds and transferring them from under the municipal manager and moving them under Mr. Schutte to 2016. So this is a reflection of the budget that he would, so he'll have 3 folks in his staff. If you have any questions about the funding or the program, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Schutte.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Madam Chair, so obviously the line item that jumps out, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, is almost $10.5 million to employees. I hope that reflects the costs associated with managing our facilities. Okay, that makes me feel a little better. And then just a comment. You know, our facilities on the whole, but particularly Denina, have been doing very well in terms of beating their revenue expectations. And I have historically asked the question as to whether we utilize those excess revenues to pay down debt more quickly. The debt is over. The answer is consistently been no. Out of
just before I go to you, Ms. Johnson, for clarification, so that everybody understands what you mean when you say facilities, this is contributions to the museum, the Performing Arts Center. Did I miss anything?
Sullivan, Rita,
Sullivan,
Van Vogie.
Right.
and Tim.
Okay. Just for clarity, I'm
Carry
hearing
the
that
model.
statement. Thank you.
Museum.
I mentioned museum. Thank you, Ms. Johnston.
When, I'm trying to remember the Sullivan Arena, Mary McDonald, that contract. When does that come up again? The contract for all of our arena, the management contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Roberts looking at me, but
Sorry.
We just renewed them.
well, I was thinking, I couldn't remember if it was 2 years ago.
Not that long. Coming to the end of the 5 years, Donald Center contract is up for renewal starting next year.
And then the others, the following year.
Falls under Judy's operation. I believe they were all in tandem together because we split that out by 4.5 years ago with the bid process. Kept Donald Center in the service area until we actually delivered them to his offices.
So they're all coming up next year.
I believe that's true. Verified.
I'll find out for you.
And, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rada. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Zimboski, do you have any questions so far?
No, Mr. Flynn kind of asked my question on the last one, so if I have a question, I'll just text you,
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Zimboski. Mr. Wilbur, I don't see anybody else with questions, so please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So next, we have Development Services. So Ms. Walsh and Ms. Brooks, I think, are both here with us today. So again, Development Services will be, this is just a reflection of a reorganization. I think the highlight here for their proposed changes for 2016 is they requested an additional staff for an additional position for electrical inspector, which is included in your proposed budget. And then they have some adjusted costs for their e-plan review and merchant credit card fees as well. So I think if you have any questions as related to their operations, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and Ms. Walsh and Ms. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur, Mr. Trainee, and then Mr. Flynn.
E-plan review, when do we anticipate that going live?
We anticipate a soft start at the first of the year. The contracts are being finalized now. The last one that needs to be finalized is the Evolve, which is the actual E-plan provider, and they're in active discussions with purchasing right now to the final tweaks for signature. So as soon as we get that done, they'll be getting the software stood up, and the goal is to start with our soft start, which is a couple of selected firms will be using it before we hook it up to our Hansen system. So first of the year to start with that.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, sure.
A couple of things. Sort of a broader question. I've been trying to keep track of who's going where with the reorganization and body counts. If we could get a summary,
Absolutely.
that would be really helpful. I'm struggling to keep track.
Essentially, we absorbed 3 admin people from Jerry Reeves' former office. That would be Linda, and then a principal accountant and an admin person. So that team will be doing the admin work for development services, and then the addition of the one electrical inspector.
Yeah, and is that a fee-supported position?
The electrical inspector, yes.
Second question. And then third is not necessarily related to your new department. I presume that's your permanent home now. Are we backfilling for you at the port?
At present, I still have a foot in both camps. My primary focus has been development services, but I have been assisting with support projects that I was involved in. And that's to be sorted out after we get through the construction season.
October. All right. Well, we'll probably want to spend a little more time getting that hashed out.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I'd like to recognize Mayor Berkowitz, who's joined us. Thank you, Mayor Berkowitz. Ms. Johnston.
So the electrical inspector, you asked my question prior to the directly. Do we know But little thing in my head, the school district complained a number of times during past meetings as far as their cost of doing business. If they have to move a power thing in a stage over to another, they have to get the electrical inspector to come and approve it, that it gets very time consuming and clumsy. Has anybody sort of looked at our code and how we handle the electrical inspections, and can we make them more efficient?
I'm glad you brought that up because as we speak, we're over at Development Services, Town Funder is inputting into PACE Tab 23, so that we're hoping to introduce it to you on October 27th, and it does have some simplifications of some of the smaller work. So you'll have a chance to look at that, and it'll be describing the different changes, small scope items that are becoming simplified and requiring less instruction.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. I don't see anyone else. Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Paul has joined us, Mr. Wilson, he's right up there.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Madam Chair, why don't we go move straight over to the library, and then we'll go back to the municipal attorney after we get done with the library, if that's okay. So our next department we'll review is the municipal library. So with the library, I think they have some adjustments in their salaries for continuation. They've also proposed some reductions and some additions. And as you can see in the slide here, some modifications to professional services, but they also want to make some adjustments in some training and make some staff adjustments as well. So, and then you should have a follow-up slide, which is a capital program. The library is interested in making some small capital improvements across the municipality, and their proposal would be that these would be state funded with matching from other sources. So I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, to start with their operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ferguson, could you please describe the reduction in professional services?
For the reduction?
Yeah.
That was a part of the first quarter budget revision. From this year, it was to go towards privatizing our public network. And as we moved along in that process, we were uneasy at this point in time to privatize because it's so complicated. And if we did the privatization and it didn't work, we were nervous. So what we'd like to do is continue to work with the IT department to improve their level of services to meet our business needs. That was 150.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing you saying is that was one-time money that you don't foresee needing immediately.
It wasn't one-time money. It was, we were going to combine our money from our IT budget with this, and it would have been continuous, so we are continuing, we'll give that back. So, does that answer your question?
I'm not sure it does.
Okay.
I may not be understanding, maybe it does, so the first time.
So the 150,000 was a first quarter budget revision that was a recurring cost.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been a 3-year contract to improve our public network. We decided at this point in time to turn that money back, see if we can work well with IT and to improve our business needs. So that.
Okay, so this question then probably is more for Lance or whoever from the IT. Does that mean we have an increment in the IT budget?
Let's find out.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything
May I switch to the capital
Oh,
budget?
absolutely. We're way ahead.
All right. I think, I'm sure these are worthwhile projects. I am skeptical as to the state's largesse this year. You don't need to answer this today, but I would like to hear some discussion about whether we include this perhaps in the Parks and Rec bond.
Or pushing it off into the next year.
I understand it's ongoing.
Right.
I think it would have to be an area one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would.
So,
So it couldn't be Parks and Rec, it could be some other method.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Ms. Johnston?
So how many days for the construction is the library not operating?
You know, the library is operating continually.
So-
We are open all the time. We were going to be closed for a week, and that was to shift the circulation function to the first floor. It requires computer setup, changing how people get in, changing workflow.
Yeah.
So we anticipate only being closed a week.
And so that week, staff will be in the process of doing that shift?
Staff will be in the process of doing the shift. We still have to check in books and shelve them. We have many projects to do during that time.
I was looking for an opportunity for librarians to maybe go out into the community if they
Well,
can, to do some,
Sure.
or just to be
Well,
available to do story time and some preschool kind
Right.
of activities.
As part of the renovation, we really did lose some meeting room space. We are working right now on a contract with Sears, a free contract, to utilize their space in the mall so that we can provide services off-site. In spite of us being open, this gives us really an opportunity to go off-site and try some things. We always do outreach anyhow, but yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Let me just follow up really quick. You mentioned Sears. I was wondering what because there's a sign already that says library in the Sears Mall. Yeah, there is. And there's nothing in it.
I'll check on that. We still are in the process of signing.
They moved really fast, I guess.
They sure did.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston, Mr. Trainee is next.
On the circulation, since we're not going to have the books and the drops outside, they're going to be internal. We're not going to send people out. We're going to have cost savings on employees, not having to go outside. Get
You know,
books.
what we'll have is safety improvements by employees not having to go outside. The automated handling will save on the, on the check-in portion. The staff will be reallocated to provide additional services in-house that they can't frankly do right now. So we will be utilizing staff effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering about the technology pilot project in Muldoon Library. What exactly is this?
That project was to, let me just take a look at that real quick. We were trying several projects in various branches. So, one of the things that's difficult right now is to manage devices, and we really don't have many at this point. We have some laptops. We don't want to replace all of our, well, let me step back. While we need to improve and replace our desktops, we still don't have all the machines we should. So the pilot would test a vending machine, somebody walks up, inserts their card, and a device, whether it's a pad, our laptop, is spit out, basically. It would allow, and we chose Muldoon because Muldoon really has been willing to try experiments and pilot projects. We don't have anything like that right now. The device, the vending machine, would also manage updates. It would clear off the machines. It would check it out, it would recharge, it would do all of it. But it only has, it's 25,000 and it does not have a lot of capacity. So we want to try various models.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, you mentioned you wanted to try some work there, and I presume that's an example of what you wanted to try out in the community. But you were talking about the Sears Mall, and is that just a function to get off-site? I mean, we had a branch library at South Anchorage, and we closed it. So
Well, Sears Mall wouldn't be the location that we would choose to replace the South End Library. We still need the South End Library. The purpose of the Sears Mall is while Lusac is under renovation. We have lost the first floor meeting room. We have, because Marston, we're not sure the noise level, and people would have to use porta potties to use the theater, and it would also be noisy. We plan to put a meeting room on the 4th floor, but we are struggling to, our PDRs show that we are continuing to do programs, but it's a struggle. And we are utilizing space we've never used before. It can be kind of funky. So the Sears Mall is
Really a space issue? I mean, in
it's
terms
a
of
space
that
issue for
renovation?
now, yes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I don't see any of, Mr. Training.
Question up here. I see a lot of money in other. What other are we thinking about?
Well, the others are funds that we've already used, like, for example, for Chugack, Eagle River, we already are spending our city dollars towards, collections, and that's true with every single location. The Lusac Materials and Technology is really affiliated with the automated handling. So it's kind of it's utilizing city dollars as the other.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Mr. Vogel, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mary Jo. Madam Chair, if we could go back to slide 9, and we'll handle the Municipal Attorney's Office, and then we'll advance to Parks and Recreation. So under the municipal attorneys, I think it's relatively simple. You'll see an adjustment in their salaries going down, but primarily that's related to many employees taking advantage of opting out of medical. Our current health medical benefits programs allows employees to opt out, so that's the majority of the $26,000 there. And then they have a suggestion to make some staff adjustments as it relates to e-discovery. So I think with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and turn it over to Mr. Paul.
Mr. Training?
As far as prosecutors, are we still prosecuting as many cases as we did before? Because the last administration was cutting back on prosecutors. How are you doing this administration?
Deputy Chair, I think that we are on track with historic averages. If you were to look at the last performance measures, and I'll take you to page, let's see where we are here. Well, while I'm flipping through, I know that we have prosecuted between 8,000 and 10,000 criminal matters a year. One of our performance measures will show you that figure. So I'm looking at attorney 19, measure number 11. They don't have that.
Unless they have their entire budget.
Well,
that won't happen.
there has always been some natural perturbations around the average. It has been as high as 13,000 cases in 2012. 2014 was 8,400. Right now, by 2015 second quarter, we're at 4,200, so that would put us a little higher than last year, less than 2012. I think the answer is that we haven't seen a significant deviation from historical practices, but I would expect that our numbers are going to increase. And partly that is because of a realignment that's happening at the state level. I think the district attorney's office is increasingly interested in downcharging some felony cases to misdemeanors, and that can have the effect of slipping the work back off to us. So it's a long-winded answer, but I believe that's the current state of play, the best I understand it.
Indigent defense, does that come into here too?
Excuse me?
Does indigent defense come into your department too? Because then we have to fund it. I'm just wondering, does it come out of your department too?
That's right. If you look at the way our budget is structured, we have an administrative line which looks to be $1.5 million or something, and that is almost entirely the Denali Law Group contract. And that is the
Are we looking to increase that at all, or is that?
Hope not. I think do you know the current term of that contract? I do not. It was renegotiated somewhat recently, but I don't know that we have any.
Because I know last year when they got the contract, they were not based in Anchorage, and they set up an office here.
That's
Just
right.
want to know the caseload, is we're going to have to give them more money for that, or? It's going to stay constant.
I'll have to double check on that, but I believe Senator Flynn is correct, that we pay them a flat rate regardless of the number of cases.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I was actually a little puzzled. I wanted to follow up on the number of cases question that Mr. Trainee posed. We passed an ordinance that essentially increased the scope of prosecutorial authority for the municipal attorney's office about a year ago, roughly. And the expectation was twofold. One, that more cases, but more importantly, that we would be the recipient of the fees, fines associated with those, rather than the state. Ms. Franklin championed that prior to the departure. So I don't presume you're going to have an answer to that question, to that comment now, but we could look into that and see, sort of with some degree of specificity, what additional areas we are in fact prosecuting and the numbers that would be helpful.
The chair will definitely do that. I don't know particulars off the top of my head. The one thing I can preview, though, is, of course, as you know, we're not the first step on the assembly line, so it may be a function of what's coming into the prosecutorial pipeline from APD, may be a function of what cases we're actually choosing to take. But I can look for that question.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to get a little more data on that, because we would expect more revenue out of that as part of the change.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Johnston?
I'm glad you brought up as far as the medical savings, because that reminds me of an overall budget question I'd like to ask.
Okay.
As far as how much savings are we going to be realizing next year from basically, our change in union contracts and also just sort of basic medical reform that has happened within our system and how it's spread out through the different departments?
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Posey, are you going to see an increase in your workload with this new fines and fees schedule the administration is going to be giving to us next week or so? They want to raise $5 million on fines and fees. Are you looking, is there going to be an impact on what you guys do relative to that?
We're not. Very noisy. I'm not expecting an increase in that. We'll step through it as we go through it. But I think most of what we're doing is changing the character of those existing infractions from misdemeanor criminal citations to minor offenses which have an associated fine. And I don't know that anyone expects that workload is going to change. I think prosecutions may actually end up being somewhat simpler because now they're not full-blown criminal proceedings, they're just citations. It may take some things off the books, but again, that's another one I can look into and get back to you on.
So we should know by next year if we pass it and see the impact next year's budget.
We'll have a much better sense.
Thank you, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cheney, as it relates to the fines and fees, we've been working with the clerk to get your work session scheduled for the 23rd, and I think the number that you're going to see is going to be closer to 1.5 than it was at 5, so in total. So probably good.
Close to what, Lance?
Okay. All right, thank you, Bill. So let's, if we can go back to slide 14. Parks and Recreation. Mr. Rada. So I think for Parks and Recreation, they have, in their proposed budget, you'll see that we have, in 2015, we had some one-time voter-approved bonds. Just to clarify here, we took them out in 2015 as a one-time hit, but then we added them back in 2016. And it's because, anyway, that's what we did. We can explain it in more detail if you have questions. But it has to do with the years, since it's a 20-year, we're counting down the years. So, for example, if you go back in 2007, we add that one-time money in, and then for $100,000, but we're still working within that 20 years, so we added it back in to keep paying on the 20-year cycle, and we'll keep adding it in until that 20-year cycle is done. But that was the format that we presented it in. It made sense to us, but might not to you, but that's the logic. The other adjustments that we made, there you go. It's a wash. Thank you, Ms. Jones. We had some proposals from the Parks and Rec to make some adjustments in salaries as it relates to some staffing that they had in 2016. And then they have some adjustments that they are proposing in 2016 as well. They do have a robust capital program as it relates to the bonds, and it's similar, I think, when we presented earlier, and as you're going to see with project management engineering, this is a list of projects that the administration is presenting to the Assembly that we would be looking to create a bond package, but this might not necessarily be the total amount or the list of projects for the bond. So I think we've given Parks and Rec a little extra time here because I know that they've got some, in the past, they've had some questions. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and Mr. Ruck.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
John, can you explain what Campbell Creek Trail rehabilitation entails?
What it entails, it's the beginning of the repairs that are necessary to that particular thing, just as we've done with the Coastal Trail and Chester Creek Trail. Actual total estimated to redo the Campbell Creek Trail, roughly $2.5 to $3 million. There are deficient areas that we have to address, and so this is the beginning of a phased approach for the rehabilitation of the trail.
Is anybody going to look at the 47th as it hits Lake Otis? Because I know where the bike path dumps out on 47th. I see kids there and adults looking both ways, then trying to make dodgeball across the street.
And Jennifer.
And Jennifer. So are we looking at the way 47th ends up there to get across Lake Otis, or are we just...
No, we're looking at the trail proper right now. The question relates to, and I'll address this maybe further in the capital program. The capital program doesn't address the specific area you and I have discussed, and that is the old Fire Station 4, which is across the street on the east side. If we want to add some money into that, there's roughly about 30,000 square feet usable on that parcel for expanded parking. Likely take $300,000 to $350,000 to actually develop that. Probably put in 30 to 35 spaces. There's currently 19 on the south side of the creek. But as far as pursuing anything with a crossing there, no, we have not considered that. It's not on our horizon. That may be, in fact, a DOT obligation because of Lake Otis.
It would be good if we would put something there, because what I'm envisioning there in Campbell Creek is for the cars to come in here, but also a way for the bikes to get across Lake Otis other than playing dodgeball, and to park their bikes there when they're in the playground. But we can talk about it.
I appreciate your concern. I've spent a lot of time out there.
I know you have. I've seen you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. She's had her hand up long enough. I've seen it a long time. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Trainee.
I don't want to lose blood for the people.
First of all, there is a legal way to cross there, and it's by going down and going the underpass.
I know, you go to Waldron, but kids' electricity
and
take the path of least resistance. They're going to cross the road.
But a couple things. One is, I hope on your radar is mapping right away through Section 30 from Bear Valley to Section 36. Do you have that anywhere in your budget this year?
We have had discussions at several levels whether or not that's going to be pursued. One of the conditions is coordination with HLB and the final disposition of some of the property. And what happens from Historic Park and Schmidt property is connectivity on up into that area. So it's still unanswered from our side what's going to be held back on that property. So we need a definitive answer, and then we will work with the community to figure out how to map it.
Yeah, it's been held back now for a couple of years, and it's time to move forward. I don't want to stop breathing when it's not done. So I hope that it's put on a priority this year, because it's time to, and it really doesn't have to be, as you and I discussed, it doesn't have to be a major survey problem, because, I mean, you can put you with a little metal cap on and have you do a GPS, and it's just to get a right-of-way so that if the land does go into
Conservation easement.
yes, that, that we have something.
A trail would still be allowed in conservation. Is
Right, but I
the
think,
question.
yeah. What are the 3 part-time positions? And the 2, what were those positions?
Those positions refer to one at Russian Jack Springs at the South Lake Chalet, one at West Pool, and one, Fairfield, right? So basically what we're doing is, we've taken our share of cuts over the last few years. We don't have a whole lot to give anymore.
Well, that's why I'm concerned.
We will be reassigning tasks and duties and absorbing, and it's just increased efficiencies based on the conditions that we're faced with. So we fully expected that we would have some loss of personnel to make up part of our budget reductions.
And then, and to be honest with you, I'm concerned because you have taken the bulk of the big hits for the last 6 years. So, I'd like to know how you're going to deal with that. And then the reduction in repair and maintenance, is this just sort of not doing?
It's an Eagle River component. So we actually have the blessing of being a service area where we control our operating capital, and we're able to reallocate, if you will. And so that piece is actually comes from their side. And
then the contribution to Girdwood, have we been doing that all along?
Yes.
And we can do that with 2 distinct service areas?
Yes.
This is where their service area is funded.
Right.
Oh, okay.
This is their collection.
It's their collection for themselves. Okay, that makes more sense. And then on Campbell Creek, the place you really need to look is under the bridge across from the peanut farm. There's huge frosty potholes. Someone's going to get hurt there someday. Might be me.
We have several areas. We have several well-known areas.
That's the whole trail. That's the worst. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, before we go too far, I just wanted to pass on. We had a lot of conversation Tuesday night at North Star Community Council about flooding at Valley of the Moon Park, and I know that's not specifically park issues, but it's Chester Creek Trail, Valley of the Moon Park, and flooding of that neighborhood. And we will hear more from the community council on that. I know we had $450,000 for study in the budget last year, the year ago, whenever it was, on that flooding issue, and they said, where are they studying, what are they doing? You have here Spinard area park improvements. Which parks are we talking about?
There's been some discussion about Spinard Road and some new potential development going PJ's area, the old PJ's. And so we recognize that there's likely going to be some requests for park improvements in the general area associated with that redevelopment. And so that's a placeholder for now until that's absolutely determined, but we want to be prepared should we get asked the question.
Fish Creek's the other one that I'm hearing in the community council, and I think we have a proposal in the budget for expansion of the trail.
There's a $1.5 million grant. We have to match that, so we have funds in there as the match for the continuation of that project.
They're talking also about widening the trail at some length between Turnagain and the coast, if you will, somehow trying to find that.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee?
John, what is the Cuddy family Midtown Park improvements? What type of improvements are we talking about there?
Cuddy Family Midtown Park is turning into, just like the west end of the park, one of the most loved areas that we have in the city. Overloved. We cannot sustain the kind of intensity of use in that area. Some of it includes the pond area. which is a separate issue, but more so the area coming off of East 40th. As you come into the parking area, and it's the gateway, if you will, for the major events that are now being staged there, we have to harden that surface. We're going to have to have a larger footprint. We haven't determined exactly how far it will go yet, but we know it's going to create a fairly large, almost like a promenade gateway coming in on that side, which is going to allow for diminished maintenance, erosion damage to the turf, etc. Some other pads that will likely go in as well to make it more conducive to the large events that are coming in and using it now.
Thank you, John. Oh, Elby wants me to ask you about the geese. The geese. Go ahead, Elby.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. I'll get to you in a second. Let me just ask
I
the
don't
question
speak that
myself.
language.
All right, let me clarify. Okay? We've gotten emails from a bunch of folks about the issue with the geese. Okay?
And the remains.
And, yeah, and so my question is, are you involved in that? So can you tell us about it? Thank you.
I don't want to speak for the other agencies that are involved, because I'm not in that position. But the fact of the matter is, the Cuddy Pond, again, is a natural habitat, for the geese. We're going to take steps in coordination with Fish and Game and others to determine what the best approach is for that particular area, whether it's revegetation, whether it's, you can put up all the signage in the world, but how people respond to the signage is up to them. But we're going to take recommendations on trying to figure out how to do some additional work in and around the pond that make it less desirable, and also protect the shoreline, because basically around you've got so many people as well that are coming down along there. So we haven't figured out the answer, but we're taking advice, and there's been collecting pooling of minds, if you will, at the library recently, and we have a staff person assigned to that.
Thank you. We're well aware of that. That's the reason, that group that's been meeting, and that's the reason why I asked the question. So they are on top of what your recommendations are going to be, right? Thank you. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I was just saying, it is a much beloved park, and do we have title to the federal property, where we were going to put a bus, midtown bus terminal? If we do, can we expand that park?
We are working on the reverter. You're talking about the old archives property?
Yes.
We're working on federal legislation related to the reverter clause on that now. That land could be available, but it has reverter clauses that would affect its ability to be put into municipal use.
That would be a no.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. There looks like there are no other questions. So
I have to try to make
Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
So our next department is the planning department. I think Mr. Hart and Ms. Stewart are here to talk about what's going on in the planning department. So for the planning department, again, part of the reorganization, Mr. Flynn, when we do the counts of who's moving where, we'll recognize where those counts are as it relates to. But really, their planning department is not changing in total counts. So adjustments that in their proposals, as part of their reductions and requests, you'll see an elimination of one planner that currently focuses on wetlands, and I believe, and Mr. Hart can confirm this, that position is vacant. And then there's some adjustments to the merchant fees, and then they also have a request to add a new planning position to help with boards and commissions and anticipation of land use regulations for the marijuana industry. So it's a no net gain. It's mostly a change in responsibilities for the planning department. So the planning department does not have a capital program. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and the folks from planning.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Yes, Madam Chair. I was intrigued when I read about the proposal to eliminate the wetland permit position. How is that going to manifest itself? Are we ceding authority to the Corps? Are we going to absorb it with other planning staff? Help me understand it.
Sure. At this point, we are going to absorb it with existing staff. And there are staff that can take on some of those duties on the team right now. So that's the anticipated route.
I'm a little concerned about that, having dealt with wetland permitting quite a bit over the years. A lack of expertise. Generalist is not necessarily well suited to handle that chore planning.
Those do require some training, and I think certainly we would afford training for anybody that's taking that on. We do have somebody that has knowledge within the office at this point.
And that's the problem, somebody. Because somebody goes on vacation.
See what we did.
That's my concern about that.
Mr. Flynn, thank you for that question. That was our question also.
Oh.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you asked it. Thank you. Ms. Johnston.
So Deed will still be involved with wetland planning, correct?
That is the plan, yes.
And we just finished our full comprehensive wetland management plan last year, right?
That is correct.
So it's a matter of periodically updating that. We do that, what, every 3 years?
I believe it is every 2 years, yes.
So that maybe in a year or so, there'll be an opportunity to beef it back up. But currently, Deed would be managing the wetland mitigation plan that we provided last year.
That is correct.
That makes sense. And then, so we have been having Erica kind of do it all. This person would be replacing Erica's job with the planning, zoning, and planning, and being sort of the go-between between the department and the boards and commissions associated with community development.
Yes, and this person would help take on a number of the responsibilities that have fallen onto her shoulders at this point. And I will also assist her in handling those duties.
So, yeah, so her job will basically go back to being a senior planner?
No. There's enough on her plate, and she's very talented, but it's we need to spread the work around and continue to provide very great service, good service at the counter as well. So it's a redistribution, but still taking care of the permit counter, taking care of the flow of permits that's coming in while we're working on these larger policy issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. I don't see anyone else. Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
All right, thank you. So next up, we are ahead of schedule, so I don't know if Ms. Oswald is here.
She is.
She is? Okay. So next one up is real estate, which includes Heritage Land Bank as well. If you look at in real estate services, I think that they have some adjustments in their staffing for 2016, and then they have some proposed recommendation changes in which really is mostly as it relates to leases. And I think the most significant one that you'll see here is an adjustment or a reduction in the lease as it relates to City Hall. But they're also proposing some adjustments in their leadership staff. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and Ms. Oswald.
Mr. Flynn, is your hand up?
Can if you want.
Can you talk anyway? Just kidding. Ms. Johnston?
I'll ask a question if anyone else has one.
Ms.
Paul
Johnson?
Tammy, did you hear my question to John Rada about section 36? And at some point, somebody's got to do a right-of-way or an access point from Bear Valley to section 36, so we can get it, move ahead with the wetland mitigation there, and with having that.
Right, and we're actually being proactive right now with section 36. I've got Nicole working with the Rabbit Creek Community Council. And we just sent them another notice, more information a couple of days ago. And I think we're being proactive.
So we might have some resolution before I stop breathing?
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Ms.
What's that
Johnson.
scheduled for?
So,
Anything else, Ms. Johnson?
yes.
Okay.
I do have a question. Somebody else in line?
I just asked Ms. Johnson if you had anything.
Not right, no, thanks.
So I'll put you on the list afterwards. Mr. Wall?
Yes, could you give me the status on the John Thomas building? That's kind of a tar baby we've had for a long time.
Right, well, the John Thomas building, the sale is still pending. They're working on their financing and that's about all I know.
Are you working on the financing?
They are working on the financing.
So somebody is actually in the process
Yes,
of...
yes, the
Thank
purchasers
you.
are working on the financing.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. Mr. Flynn?
Mr. Hall, I'll talk offline about John Thomas. I thought that real estate services and HLB essentially already combined themselves, so I'm puzzled by the reduction of the director position. You're now being paid by somebody else to do the same job you're already doing?
Well, I'm paid 50-50 between HLB and real estate services, and I've elected after the first year to drop down to 30 hours a week instead of 40.
So you're reducing your time?
I am reducing my time.
Okay. All right. Good for you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Johnson?
No, I'm just,
Okay. Mr. Tranny?
Tammy, the Sunshine Law, can you explain its status and the cost we've got going into it?
I
And
don't
when
know.
will the lease be up on that?
It was an 18-month lease, and so it's, it's a ways out.
Are we outsourcing it? I mean, are we making any money off subleasing the space, or are we just something we're buying to remain vacant?
To my knowledge, SAP is still utilizing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tranny. No other questions? Mr. Will, please continue.
All right, thank you, Madam. Okay, next up we have project management and engineering, and then the traffic department, and then we are probably be at least 15 minutes ahead of schedule, Madam Chair. So with that, I'll bring Mr. Hanson, Mr. Jones, and I think Mr. Robinson. So on the operating side of project management and engineering, I think really they made some minor adjustments, proposals for adjustments in 2016. I think the one notable one would be a proposal for a reduction in a environmental specialist that works with watershed management for 2016. And then for their capital program, what we've done in this slide here is we really condensed the list of projects that they had. I mean, obviously in your capital book, the last line where it says other projects at 13.385 million, that's a long list of a variety of other projects. But what OMB have done here for this slide for the benefit of this presentation is try to highlight some of the large, more significant projects, particularly those that we're looking for state match, and those that require state or asking for state match are some things that we've done and been successful with in the past. So I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Hanson, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Robinson, if you have questions about their operations or their capital program.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston?
Well, you caught my attention as far as the watershed management, and that would be outside. But are you going to be able to manage that in a timely manner with any department? Or that? I think I've known you or some of your summer, it's kind of a summer intern kind of position.
This position is a full-time position that we haven't hired for some time. We have another position that we are going to, it's full-time, but we are going to try to put 2 seasonal positions there in place of, so we can have more people out in the field during the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Trainee?
Ramona, do we have any ADA capital improvement projects listed? Any ADA projects?
Is there a regular program for ADA program improvements?
There is a regular program. We completed some this past summer. We have other projects where ADA is a component of them, other road projects. In the CIP, we do have money specifically targeted for ADA in out years, which is not next year.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Lance, I'm not going to be here next Friday, but I'm a little troubled by the state match component of the other projects on the capital list.
If I could add on to that, I think, Mr. Flynn, similar to last week, and I didn't mention it here on the state program, obviously similar to the list of bonds for parks, the list of proposed project bonds for PM&E, and the list of state projects, I am confident that the list of projects that the mayor may consider for a legislative request will not be anything close to $134 million. So this proposal is to show if the administration is going to look for a legislative program to the state, where the matching might be, and the list of projects both in PM&E and in Parks and Rec and others. Those would be the ones we would look to. The administration would then propose a legislative program for your consideration after the CID and the CIP. If you have a different recommendation or guidance before we approve the document, obviously we'll look forward to those as well. But it is.
Well, it's tough to break them out.
Yes.
Got my list, but there's no prioritization in here in terms of what the department feels is most vital. I just think we need to be very thoughtful in what we put forward, and so it would help thing to have a feel for what the gotta-haves are versus the nice-to-haves versus the money rain from heaven we can have.
At this point, I don't think we're likely to recommend that we plan for any state road dollars during the 2016 legislative session.
I think that's fair. That's why
This is basically, we rolled the CIP forward. This is what was in the CIP last year for 2016's state grant requests, and in some cases, the 2015 state grant request that also didn't get funded. This is not designed to be the draft legislative or administration recommendation for the legislative program. You'll see that in a month or so. And if it was today, there would be a 0 under roads. In the discussion we should have with the assembly, and I think you guys have had this in recent years, is should we include projects that community councils and neighborhoods and third parties want to see funded simply so that they're on our list, or not.
If we want to put those in the back of the book, that's fine. What I'm trying to get to here is for this bond list, and there's specificity of the first 5 lines, 6 lines, and then we have other projects. The catch-all needs to be better defined, and And I think you're correct, it should not assume state dollars. And so what I would like us to at least have some concept of is what we are anticipating with the bond proposal moving forward when we approve the budget. I know that there's always flux and, we won't get to that until January, but
Maybe December this year.
But some level of specificity I think would be very helpful.
I think in the bond category, I think what you see is pretty close to what if it was today, this is pretty close to what the administration would recommend. And as you suggest, in the book, the other projects line is spelled out. This was just for today's presentation that it was bundled together.
Yeah, my problem with what's on the book is, again, there's no prioritization. I don't know if a sound barrier wall replacement is more important than a storm drain condition assessment rehabilitation project.
On the bond list, you mean?
Yeah.
On the bond list, we can provide you with some level of prioritization. I don't think on the state grant list.
I don't care about the state grant list.
Okay,
Put that in the back of the book.
We're on the same page. Okay. No, we can come up with something that would help guide you on the administration's current thoughts on what a bond list would look like.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
may have
Chairman.
input.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Train.
Thank you, Chair. On other projects, can you give us a breakdown by community council? Because we go to community councils, Evan and I do 9 a month. And they keep saying, we sent projects in administration, we never hear back what the priority is on them. I want to know from this miscellaneous other projects, what community council it comes from, because I've got to be able to tell them, the administration is listening to your wish list, and this is its ranking of other projects.
Nope, we can do that. There's about 10 projects in there. We can show you which councils those
And that's
belong
great,
to.
Mike. So we go to the community councils, I can give it to the president of each community council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Train. Mr. Steele.
I anticipate there will be a couple of dollars for each legislative district. And if we can identify some projects to spread around the city, we can take advantage of that should that happen.
That is not the case. Right now, I mean, among other things, the road service area leaves out half a dozen legislators altogether because Chugiak Eagle River and the Upper Hillside and Girdwood aren't in they can't be funded through this program. And there aren't enough projects. Some of these are area-wide, so they'll touch everybody. But the discrete named projects probably aren't distributed equally or evenly around the service area.
Even if they're just road upgrades or road repavement or road maintenance issues, I would suspect that they're going to have to spread a little bit around. A little bit might be very little, but Eagle River will get most of it, I would expect.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I just have one comment, Mr. Flynn. Thank you for mentioning the fact that you'd like to see priorities, because I can tell you about one priority for Mr. Train and I, and that's the Sylvan Drive project, which I think it was up 1.5 million that they already have for design, and it's shovel ready, and it's in the mayor's capital budget for a bond for 2020. And Mr. Train and I plan to move it to 2016, and just a heads up.
With help of our colleagues.
Right. I'm hopeful. Well, you know the deal. Anyway, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Glover, please continue.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kevin. So next is our last department under general government before we start utilities in about half an hour. So I think Mr. Mormillo is with us, and I'm going to ask Mr. Robinson to sit with us as well. So on the traffic department, under 2016, again, Stephanie Shop is being transferred out of Public Works under the municipal manager's standalone department. We referenced the relevant assembly ordinance that was before you. She also, some changes, there's continuing bonds that we show in 2016, and then they proposed, and we are included in our proposal, some overtime so that they can catch up on some projects, some bond projects. I think primarily it's either related to signals or traffic calming. So I think with that, and she has a capital program. It's very similar to what you've seen in the past. It's area-wide with bonds and some state funds for signal improvements and dealing with intersections and congestion. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and Ms. Mormillo and Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couldn't let this one go by. Stephanie, how is the recompense that you get from the state for signal maintenance going these days?
Well, I'm happy to say that we got everything we should this year for this request. It's a continuing conversation. The state at this time is doing some research on their side to see if there's any way that they can use federal funds to fund part of the transfer of responsibility agreement for which we do. That covers not just the signal maintenance and operation, but there's certain striping components that are involved in that, signing components, and then also a portion of lighting. So they're doing research on their side to see whether or not they have any options to ask for federal funds to help supplement the payment for that TORA. There has been no formal determination on their part and no discussion as far as reduction in the amount of the TORA funded.
Is there taking FHWA money or FTA or?
Probably primarily FHWA. The issue being that most of the work that we do through the TORA is maintenance, and generally federal funds are not for maintenance dollars. They're more for capital improvements. So they're looking at if they have a kind of a regular, for example, lighting, and if they decided that every 3 years or every 5 years they were going to relamp all of the lights that we're maintaining for the state as part of that TORA, because they're primarily high pressure sodium, so it's changing of a bulb. That if they said that they're just bar none every 3 years going to relamp whether they need it or not, that can be considered capital, and whether or not they could get funding from FHWA for that portion.
They'd love to move it to LED as opposed to HSP or HPS.
They're looking into it, yes. They're actually planning on doing a couple test projects, moving to LED.
They're also planning to go dark on a number of routes this year. They're planning to set up streetlight timing so that there will be hours in the evening where certain roads with lights installed will not be turned off.
That would be interesting to learn a little bit more about.
Yeah.
Minnesota Drive, Tudor to C, I believe is the most significant chunk that they're planning for right now. And I believe their plan is that this winter they will test that in the wee hours of the evening. I don't think they may have it all the way scoped out, but when I heard about it, it was only conceptual. That would not affect the TORA. These are light bills they pay themselves.
Electrical bills, but still.
But if they did that on lights that we did manage for them, it would be an offset to the TORA potentially.
As the fence is almost fences to International Airport, the loose fence.
Yeah, I think moose is the big issue that everybody's thinking about on that.
Yeah, the moose fence is continuous in section. I mean, from International running all the way south to O'Malley, where this would be, and from International and Tudor, really it's grade separated from the surrounding areas. That's why there's kind of barrier walls on both sides.
It's dangerous.
We spent a lot of time on this discussion.
Yeah,
I'll stop. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Training?
Mr. Abbott, or Stephanie, go dark on Tudor Road from where to where?
No, on
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Tudor Road they're leaving alone?
You know what that is was?
Not worried about it.
From Tudor to C.
Yeah,
I thought you said something about Tudor.
From Tudor to C, O'Malley C, so the corridor of Minnesota pretty much the entire grade separated part of
Basically from
Minnesota.
SBS to the, what would have been the new Target that they built.
And that's fine, I just want to make sure it wasn't on Tudor Road. Too many people go down that road, as they do Minnesota. When's this supposed to happen?
We have,
We haven't heard specifically, but their plan was to do it this winter.
As you
So-
find out, will you let us know, because I've got some real concerns if they're talking about making part of Anchorage go dark. Because they're not gonna get the calls, we're gonna get the calls. So
Well, they're gonna get the call. They may start with us, but they
I know.
will, if it's related to streetlight issues on state routes, we know exactly where they'll go.
But Mike, you know people don't care. It's the roads in the city. Why isn't somebody doing something about it? So thank you.
Anything that happens will be like.
Anything else, Mr. Train?
Huh?
Anything else?
No.
Thank you, Mr.
It's
Train.
going dark.
We're scheduled, we're a half an hour ahead of time, and we're scheduled for a break. So it's like almost 12:30. Should we reconvene at 12:45 or sooner? 12:45? 45, okay, thank you. Mr. Bosky, 12:45, we'll be back.